in Western society, we seem to have, in my mind, like a hierarchy of types. And basically what I'm saying is that those that succeed, make the most money, rise to the top of corporations and government, really kind of lean heavily into extroverted thinking or TE. But as a thought experiment, what do you think society would look like if we just inverted that pyramid? So we'd had our introverted feelers at the top and our extroverted thinkers in a different spot. Like, how would it look? I'd love to have another INTJ kind of run wild with that.
Right. So that's kind of an interesting idea because if you flipped it, that would mean like the ISFPs and the INFPs. I think you would have a society more so focused on culture than you would competition with one another. And I think you can almost see that when you look at certain, I don't want to say like Eastern Western countries, because like countries like Sweden, for example, who are very introverted by nature. If you do the contrast with Big Five scores them to us, they're very, very introverted. I think a lot of those countries tend to focus more on things like culture because their support systems support them enough so that they don't have to be in competition with each other. So therefore, they don't feel the need to be kind of battling against one another all the times. And people who are in fields like art and music and production can succeed more easily without it being detrimental to them to not do so. Because I think like in Western societies, it's detrimental to attempt to be some sort of artist because the society doesn't provide ways for them to be living by doing so.
Okay, so are you saying more like kind of like maybe the Nordic countries are a better example of how they're doing it a
Yeah,
little bit?
I'm not too familiar with like culture over there, but I know, for example, that they do tend to be more introverted and they do tend to be more economically left. So they're more open with like social support systems and things of that nature. And I'm not saying I support those types of things. I'm just saying if those systems were in place, you would find that people would be more interested in things like the arts and culture.
I've never thought about extroverted thinking in the sense of like the first thing that comes to mind is not competition, but I guess thinking the way you said it, is that sort of what it just naturally lends itself to competition?
I think the extroverted thinking like top twos are the ones who are the most aware of like general competence hierarchies, and they are the ones who want to climb them if possible, especially the TE DOMs. You look at TE DOMs and they're the ones racing to get promotions at work. And it's yes, there is value in like, you get more money and there's stuff like that, but I think the rank and achievement of it is what pushes them as well. So therefore, to get those things, you have to compete with other people.
Okay, so then what is, success in the FI dominant is, I mean, it would be hard to define success broadly across
Right.
society with FI, would it not? Like how would it look? Just more, everyone's got their own individual expression that's manifested?
Right. And because I think the thing you notice with FI a lot is they tend to have this attitude of I respect my way of doing things when it comes to like right and wrong. And except in the case of like some introverted feeling dominant types who are in the healthiest spot, they for the most part respect other people's ways of doing things as long as it's not interrupting their way of doing things.
In my coaching, I've not coached any ISFPs or INFPs. I think the closest like FI I've come across ENFPs tend to really gravitate towards personal development, things like that. So I've not dealt with an FI Dom. Have you, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, I find that INFPs are one of my more frequent types. I've worked with like one or two ISFPs, but their problems are always very similar in my experience. And that it's that they have this kind of unconscious value for extroverted thinking, but they really struggle to do it. And an extremely common thing is they try to start their own businesses because they think they need to achieve success, like on some unconscious level. And then they're like, I'm miserable. I don't want to be doing this business. I'm not happy with what I'm doing. And it's like, well, what would you be doing if you could do anything you want? That's one of the questions you can ask anyone to kind of get a basic idea of what their type might be in the first place. Because if they know the answer to that, there's probably at least some correlation to their type.
Yeah. And I was talking to someone today and they were like, well, I just have a bunch of different causes I support. And I'm like, it's hard to narrow it down. I think the TE
Right.
would be able to narrow it straight down.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what it is. So that is interesting. Now, when it comes to the MBTI community, there are, as we know, tons of different models, branches that have like just over time branched off and have like their own kind of sector. Like, oh, I don't follow the dichotomies. I'm into cognitive functions or the BB model or socionics or objective personality. What is or temperaments? What is the model that you personally follow?
So I have kind of two different ways of doing this, and it is a little bit of a Frankenstein's monster as much as I wish it wasn't, because on a personal level, I like the idea of Jung's 8 types the most, because I personally think of the second and third function as the two auxiliary functions instead of the auxiliary and the tertiary, and that's how Jung taught them. So for me, that's like my favorite way of interpreting that, but I think that the Briggs 16 types is the best way to classify the types, and it's just the one that everyone knows at this point, and it's so easy because we can look at an INTJ, it's like, oh, I know exactly what functions they have, INFP, whatever. So I think in the terms of the theory, I like Jung's original work, but in terms of the classification, I very much like the Briggs 16 types.
Okay. And do you go farther than in your coaching or in helping people than the top four functions? You go deeper than that, shadow, or how do you deal there?
No, because from my interpretation, this is again just my opinion. I don't. A lot of people call those last 4 functions the shadow, and Jung called the 4th function the shadow, the unconscious the shadow. So to me, it's almost like there's a conflict in how people view these functions, and to me, I find it more helpful to my clients when I help them with like their second and third, or their third and fourth function, I mean, or specifically their fourth function is most of the time the thing that they're having some sort of problem with. Or surprisingly enough, with their auxiliary, if they're at a point and they're younger, 20 years old, and they haven't even begun that process, getting them to healthily engage in that process can be a huge help to them as well.
So you kind of look at it as the axis, dominant, inferior, and then the tertiary auxiliary is like axes.
Yeah, pretty much.
That is a good way to think about it. And you did a recent video, I think you said it was like, is the tertiary weaker than the auxiliary, or maybe I had it opposite. Yep. That was an informative one. I liked one of your videos recently, conceptualizing NE and NI. Like that is something that I want to ask, because I'm kind of NEing right now. There's so much content around niche aspects of MBTI. Like you could probably find a video of like, how does your 7th trickster function manifest at work? Like you could find that. How do you keep coming up with content that you find interesting, but you're also like, my audience is also going to be interested? Is it like from the comment section where it's like someone asked this great idea, or what?
I do have like a video suggestions, like on my Patreon, people can suggest videos, and then in my Discord channel or my Discord server, I have a place where people can suggest videos. Most of the time, it's not often a direct suggestion that inspires me, but like a thought I have related to a suggestion that somebody has. And the way in which I record videos, it's very easy for me to like see a comment, and then the next day I can have a video on that, because I'm very much like a spark of madness type of person when it comes to my ideas. Like if I'm having the idea, I need to have it. Like I need to like do something with it before I run out of time to, or it just sits there for too long. So if I have those ideas, I want to make the video as soon as possible. I want to do something with it.
That is so hilarious, because I will get that NI explosion. I'll write it down, and if I don't still want to do it after 3 days, I erase it. So you're saying you have a more immediate, like if I don't do this within 24 hours, it'll just be, I won't be motivated.
For me, it's always if I don't do it by the next recording day, and like I have 2 recording days a week right now because I do 2 videos a week.
Okay.
So usually I'll have an idea and I'll kind of write it down and I'll think on it for a while. But the more I think about it, the more excited I get about it. And it's like, to get that energy out, I need to make a video. So I can kind of TE explain it. And for me, that's kind of why I started my YouTube channel. It was like, I have these ideas that I just want to explain. And it's nice to kind of have that verbal way of getting that. It's almost like a journal or diary, but in YouTube instead.
Yeah. You decided recently that you were going to go back to school, get a PhD in psychology. I would say that's a bold move. But I do know a lot of INTJs tend to kind of climb the academic hierarchy. They like to get certified in things or really test their knowledge. And the NTs tend to just rise to they tend to be clustered in PhD fields. So what are you doing after you get the doctorate? Are you still going to be using MBTI, or what's going to happen there?
Yeah, so I've kind of always wanted the PhD for the past few years, and I graduated in 2019 with my bachelor's, and I've had 2 application cycles where I didn't get in. So every year I'm putting in applications for PhD programs. The clinical psychology is one of the most competitive fields, even for someone who I had a straight A GPA, and I'm still not getting in. So it's just one of those things where I have to do it year after year. to kind of get in. I would like to still work with MBTI. I've always said that I probably will make a second channel if I do get a doctorate one day, because I'd like to have the more casual content and then maybe like a professional channel, like, with my formal legal name instead of AsuraPsych, where on that channel I could post things related more so to like the scientific aspects of psychology related to the things I'm interested in. In formal research, I want to work in dissociative disorders and like schizophrenia, personality disorders, these sorts of things. And I think I can still be interested in both of these fields and do things in both of them. But I do think that there is some degree of separation there.
Are you thinking about writing a book someday?
Yes, I'd love to write a book one day, and I think about it all the time. Right now, I write articles all the time on my website and stuff, especially like the fantasy ones. For me, the idea is, because I thought about writing like an MBTI book explaining my thoughts and concepts, but it's like, what new could I bring to the table in a book that hasn't already been written, by someone like Jung a million times?
That is funny. Well, I think someone that's kind of inspiring to me is, Michael Pierce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have his book. It's on
Yeah.
the shelf right behind me.
Boats and Beams is like came out. I think when I interviewed him, he said he wrote it in 2020. So I'm like, he has this like neo-Jungian view. He like very confusing. I told him this on the interview. I was like, that when you got into like the Chinese zodiac sort of thing, I was very confused. But he tries to tie that in. So I feel like going back to like the second question I have for you is like, it almost would have to be something where you're bringing something else in and then merging it together to create something new, because literally like what hasn't been said. You and I would be considered part of the new guard of type.
Right.
What are we supposed to do to like make it still attractive, because it's kind of viewed as like old? Oh, I did MBTI like 20 times. We've had so many people come into our company and do it. So what are we supposed to do?
Yeah, it's difficult. I've been pushing for this idea that I don't think that MBTI needs to be seen as a science to be valid. And I love to describe MBTI or just personality typology in general as a philosophy of psychology instead of a science of psychology. Okay. And I think that's how Jung viewed it as well. He wasn't saying that like we like in our brains is the functions. He was saying that this is the way in which humans most likely conceptualize the things that they interact with and how they process information. And then we can better understand ourselves and others through these models of understanding. And I think that thinking about it like that is so much more helpful. And if we could get the world to realize that like, okay, Big Five is great. Sure, it's great. It's scientific. It's quantitative. What does it do for you? That's where it ends. It's like, what is Big Five doing for you as an individual? Have you changed your personality or behavior through Big Five? 90% of people are going to say no, just because it doesn't really do the same things that MBTI does.
That's how I think it should be. I think we should be talking about as a philosophical thought model. This is just one model that I subscribe to, and I think it works, and we know personality exists. But the other thing is like, because we have a TE society, it's always like, well then, like I need to see the data behind it. TE. It's like, show me how it is going to give me an ROI.
Right. And it's not even that. It's also like the ST aspect where they want the raw data of the thing. And like, if they can't measure it, and as much as I love the idea of, like Skinnerism and behaviorism and all this stuff, I think it was harmful for psychology in the long run, because now I think we've gotten to the point where we forgot that psychology is about humans. And if we look at psychiatry compared to psychology, psychiatry is more along the lines of, well, this thing worked for 78% of people. So therefore, if you have this issue, we're going to use X solution because it worked for 78% of people. Well, the other 22% of people are out of luck. And that's kind of the issue that modern psychology faces, being too much of a hard science, is we forget the human aspect. We forget that people aren't numbers.
That is a tragedy as well. And there's something else that I want to know your take on it, because I've been saying it for the last like couple of videos. Is like, I could say like, Asura, describe yourself, and you could probably say like analytical. You might say something like conceptual. I might be more of a wallflower if I go to parties, stuff like that. And then I'd say, oh, well, the way that I would classify that is INTJ. Well, and then you go, no, I'm not an INTJ. I'm an ESFP, or I don't like these labels. But like, if you to describe your friend over there, you would assign labels. And we
Yeah,
say, oh, your friend sounds like he's this.
we categorize everyone. That's just how we work as humans.
So then I try to go, well, there's a 16 types that also label that as well. What's wrong with that? And they go, well, that's the box. And then they're like, I don't want to be labeled. I'm like, that's the other thing where we have this illogical fear of being in a certain category.
Right. And it's so weird, especially in the past like 2 or 3 years, where things like race and identity have become so huge because now we're labeling everything. Everything's labeled. You can't do anything without having a label.
Yeah.
And people still talk about MBTI like they're afraid of having the label. And I feel like there's like a middle ground somewhere where you can be like, you don't have to be the label, but it's there to help you in some aspect.
That is a great observation. I've also said, like, I've actually just going to lean into the box and be like, okay, yes, it's a box, but it's a 5,000 square mile box and it will take you your entire life to navigate. As Jung said, like, you'll never integrate all the things. So don't worry about like being in this box because you can't even discover it all. It's going to take
Right.
your whole life. So
I like that
yeah,
mental
let's
picture
just lean
there.
into the box and just say, yes, it's a huge box, but you can't even, it's like, back in when computers first came out, it was like Age of Empires and all these games where you're discovering the map as you go. You can't see the map until you walk into the area.
Right. The fog of war. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, that's how I think about it. And I don't think people need to be scared about it, but I'm not here. And I don't think you're here either to convince people they need to believe in type.
Right. No, I think you could go through life without type just fine, but I think it is such a useful tool for the people who do use it and if they find out the right ways to use it.
Absolutely. So for my audience, because I'm sure they know you because you're pretty well known in the type community. But where should they find you? Like, if they want to contact you, if they're looking to join your Discord or get on your newsletter, where do they do that?
Yeah, so just in the comment, not the comment, the description box for all of my videos. If you want to join my Discord, go to the newest video because every now and then, even if I set the link to never expire, it expires, and I don't know why it does that. So I always tell people go to the newest video and look in the description box if you want to join the Discord.
Okay. And how's your channel been growing?
Pretty stable, especially since I went back up to 2 videos a week because I took some time off and was doing 1 a week for a while. But it's slow and steady as it is in this niche. There's not a whole ton of rocket growth unless you're doing things like comedy and skits and stuff.
Yeah, we do know this though, that the INTJs tend to be on most channels like the top video.
Oh, definitely. I mean, my number 1 video was like 480,000 views, and it's just a video about INTJs. What do they like?
Are we just self-obsessed, or are other people obsessed with us?
It's just a whole kind of like rarity thing. People love that. People, even if they're not rare, they want to know about what is rare. And that's kind of strange. Well, it's not strange. It makes sense. But at the same time, I always tell people that like an ISTJ and an INTJ are not that far apart. Like if you think the INTJ is cool and mysterious, the ISTJ, is probably the same way, at least in some regards.
Yeah.
They lead with a very similar function. They have the exact same auxiliary tertiary. So.
Yeah, it's a great, and my wife's an ISTJ and we get along. I mean, I think it's just like a perfect relationship. But honestly, I only know 1 ESFP and I think they're rare, but apparently INTJ is more rare, but I don't come across them ever.
Yeah, I actually have a kind of an opinion on this. I think that when they were norming the MBTI studies, it was done before the internet was in place, and therefore there were less intuitives involved in the kind of process of when they were going out and interacting with individuals. Now intuitives are a dime a dozen. You can't, walk 5 feet without running into them, and they think that they're only 30% of the population. I think they probably are closer to 40, 45, and that the difference isn't nearly as big as people think.
That's a hot take because when I present type in very high level, I always use like what David Kiersey was like 75-25. Intuitive sensing is we mostly have a sense for society. So you're saying it's more like 60-40 or even higher?
Yeah, I just think that the intuitives are much more, especially like back then, they were more like reclusive in their interest or eccentric, essentially. But now the internet exists and it's no longer weird to be weird. Like it's just normal to be weird. So they come out of their cages and they're happy to show themselves and do things and interact with others, and they have a safe place to do so. And it's one of those things where like I do believe that the intuitives are a little bit more rare, and from like an evolutionary standpoint, that makes sense. because the intuitives are the ones who are going to be more risky. They're going to leave camp to go looking for new things to do, and they're more likely to get eaten by a bear. But now that we have things like the internet, it's no longer dangerous to the intuitive, and I think therefore we see the ones who were afraid of the risk coming out of the woodworks.
I don't do intros, I don't do outros. We just get to it. So Asura, thanks so much for exposing your INTJ big brain to the audience. I really appreciate it. And I will also, I might just kind of copy your, all the links in your, the box under your channel and just put it in there. And just say
either my channel or AsuraPsych.com. Those are the only
perfect.
two real places to go. So.
Perfect. Well, take it easy. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, for sure. See you.